You ever think about how to make sure everybody's voice is heard? You know, especially in places like college campuses where new ideas should always be coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Oh, cool.
Taking a deep dive into some excerpts from Dr. Freitas' podcast, Advising You.
Okay.
And he has some really interesting thoughts about fostering authentic leadership and making sure those voices that sometimes don't get heard, how to make sure those are front and center.
Yeah, and what really struck me was how Dr. Freitas, he really emphasizes that it's not enough to just give, marginalized groups a seat at the table.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where they feel like they can really speak their minds.
Totally.
To challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And know that their perspective is valued.
Absolutely. And he uses this really powerful phrase, I think. He talks about colonized views.
Right.
What do you make of that? Yeah.
That's such a powerful way to describe how traditional power structures, even in academia, can, subtly impose this kind of singular lens.
Yeah.
Like certain perspectives are seen as the default.
Right.
While others are kind of, marginalized or dismissed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think Freitas is really, pushing us to think critically about whose narratives end up dominating our understanding of the world.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how many voices and ideas we're missing out on just because they haven't been given the space.
Exactly. And what's interesting? One of the ways that Dr. Freitas suggests we can, break down these barriers is it's surprisingly simple.
Okay.
Blog posts.
Blogs. I wouldn't have thought of that. How do those fit into, how does that fit in?
It might seem a little old school.
Yeah.
But think about it. Targeted blog posts, they offer a very direct line of communication. Students, staff, even people in leadership roles can use them to share their experiences, talk about issues that, maybe aren't being addressed, and just build a sense of community.
So it's less about long form essays.
Right.
It's more about just creating a platform.
Exactly.
Where people can, just be heard.
It's about fostering authenticity.
Right.
And relatability.
Yeah.
When we share our own experiences, our own challenges, it kind of chips away at those hierarchical barriers. It creates a sense of shared purpose. Right. Like, take, for example, the University of Texas at Austin.
Okay.
They've got a fantastic blog.
Oh, cool.
Where students and staff, they share their stories, their insights, advice about navigating campus life, and it's incredibly powerful and relatable.
And that relatability is key.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of relatability, Dr. Freitas doesn't shy away from challenging traditional models of leadership.
Yeah.
He really advocates for a bottom-up approach.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, it's like recognizing that leadership, it isn't about telling everyone what to do from on high,
Yeah.
It's about making sure everyone at every level of the school feels empowered.
Okay.
So, imagine if student and staff feedback, what if that actually changed how things worked?
Huh. Interesting.
Instead of, the administration just deciding everything.
Yeah. So instead of like a pyramid, it's more like everybody's on the same level.
Exactly. And everyone has a voice they can contribute. And the leaders, they're more like facilitators. They're collaborating. They're really listening.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of listening, one thing that really stood out to me was when Dr. Freitas talked about listening beyond the whispers. What do you think he meant by that?
Oh, that's such a good point. Especially on a campus, how rumors can spread.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's so important to cut through all that noise, all the gossip.
Yeah, it's like everyone's got an opinion, but is it based on anything real?
Exactly. And that's where I think Dr. Freitas is really challenging us to think critically about the information we're taking in, because to really understand something, you have to go to the source.
That reminds me of this one time back when I was in college. There was this rumor going around about a professor.
Oh,
People were saying they were like super tough grader, just totally unfair.
Oh, no.
And I have to admit, I kind of let it get to me, even though I'd never even met them.
It's so easy to do that, though, right?
I know.
It's like we can't help but be drawn in by these stories.
It's true.
But Dr. Freitas reminds us that those stories aren't always true.
Right.
They can be colored by, people's biases or assumptions or just wrong information.
Yeah. And it turned out the rumor was completely false. I found out later from someone who actually took the class that this professor was actually really supportive and fair.
Wow.
It was a good lesson.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you hear.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights why it's so important to think for yourself. Don't just accept the easy narrative. Dig a little deeper.
And maybe even be brave enough to question those narratives if we see them, hurting people.
Exactly. That's where that idea of listening beyond the whispers really hits home.
Yeah.
It's about having those open and honest conversations, even when they're tough or challenge what we think we know.
And you know what I really appreciate? Dr. Freitas doesn't just drop these big ideas on us.
Right.
He actually gives us a call to action.
He does.
He wants everyone, students, staff leadership, everyone to be a part of building this, more inclusive environment.
It's a good reminder that, we all have a part to play in this, right?
Yeah.
No matter, where we are in the whole scheme of things on campus.
Totally.
Change doesn't just come from the top.
Right.
It takes everybody.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this right now, think about what you can do. What can you do in your own life to really, amplify those voices that aren't always heard?
Yeah. It could be something small, even just, making a point of listening to someone with a different perspective or speaking up when you see something that's not right.
Totally. Or even using your own voice.
Yeah.
To advocate for change.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation. I mean, we've covered so much of Dr. Freitas' work.
We did.
From the power of blogs to that idea of, listening beyond the whispers.
Yeah.
And how important it is to have that bottom-up leadership.
Absolutely. And, going back to those colonized views, when we start to recognize those structures and really dismantle them, that's when we can start to create spaces where everyone feels like their voice matters.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
How do we make sure that all these voices we're amplifying, how do we make sure they lead to real change?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And not just on campuses, but everywhere.